The desert heat shimmered like liquid glass across the Afghan landscape as Sergeant Rex, a German shepherd with battle scars etched deep into his dark fur, limped through the abandoned village. His right hind leg dragged behind him, leaving a crimson trail in the sand that told the story of the explosion that had torn through his patrol unit 3 hours earlier. The improvised explosive device had claimed the lives of 2 soldiers and left Rex with shrapnel embedded deep in his muscle and bone. Rex's breathing came in shallow pants, his tongue hanging from his mouth as he searched desperately for shade. The military dog had served 4 tours of duty, detecting countless bombs and saving hundreds of lives with his extraordinary sense of smell. His handler, Corporal Martinez, had been among those killed in the blast, and now Rex wandered alone through hostile territory with no way to call for help. The sound of approaching vehicles made Rex freeze, his ears perking up despite his pain. Through the haze of heat and agony, he could see military trucks approaching from the north. His training kicked in immediately. These weren't American vehicles. The distinctive engine sounds and the way they moved in formation told him these were enemy combatants, likely Taliban fighters who had heard the explosion and come to investigate. Rex dragged himself behind a crumbling mud wall, his body trembling from exhaustion and blood loss. He had been trained to remain silent in dangerous situations, but every instinct told him to bark out a warning that would never reach friendly ears. The truck stopped just 50 meters away, and Rex could hear voices speaking in Pashto as armed men began searching the area. One of the fighters discovered the blood trail Rex had left behind. The man followed it slowly, his AK-47 raised and ready. Rex pressed himself deeper into the shadows, knowing that if he were discovered, the enemy would either kill him immediately or capture him for propaganda purposes. Military working dogs were valuable prizes for insurgent groups, and Rex had seen enough combat to know his fate would not be pleasant. The fighter's boots crunched on broken glass as he approached Rex's hiding spot. The injured dog's heart pounded so hard he was certain the man would hear it. Just as the Taliban fighter rounded the corner of the wall, a distant explosion echoed across the valley. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of American helicopters approaching from the east. The fighters immediately abandoned their search and rushed back to their vehicles. Rex watched as they sped away, leaving him alone once again in the sweltering heat. The helicopters grew closer, their rotors beating rhythmically against the desert air. Rex tried to stand, hoping to signal his location, but his injured leg couldn't support his weight. He collapsed back to the ground, his vision beginning to blur from blood loss and dehydration. The helicopters passed overhead without stopping. Rex knew they were probably heading to the site of the original explosion to recover his fallen teammates. He closed his eyes and felt the weight of despair settling over him like a heavy blanket. In all his years of service, through firefights and bomb detection missions, Rex had never felt so utterly alone. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Rex heard a different sound. This time it was the quiet purr of a single vehicle moving slowly and deliberately. Through his fading vision, he could see an unmarked Jeep approaching with 2 figures inside. The vehicle stopped near the abandoned buildings, and Rex heard car doors closing softly. Footsteps approached his position, but these sounded different from the Taliban fighters. They moved with the measured precision of trained soldiers, placing each step carefully to minimize noise. Rex's nose twitched as he caught a familiar scent on the desert wind. It was the smell of American military equipment, gun oil, and something else he couldn't quite identify. A shadow fell across Rex's hiding place, and he looked up to see a tall figure in desert camouflage kneeling beside him. The man's face was painted with combat makeup, and his gear was unlike anything Rex had seen before. This wasn't a regular soldier. The equipment, the way he moved, everything about him suggested special operations. The stranger reached out slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Rex's training told him to be cautious with unknown personnel, but something about this man seemed different. There was a calmness in his eyes and a gentleness in his approach that spoke of someone who understood military working dogs. Rex tried to growl a warning, but only a weak whimper escaped his throat. The stranger paused, studying Rex's injuries with the practiced eye of someone who had seen combat trauma before. He reached into his pack and pulled out a medical kit, but Rex instinctively pulled away. He had been taught to only accept help from authorized personnel, and this man was clearly operating outside normal channels. The stranger's eyes met Rex's, and something passed between them that transcended the usual human-animal interaction. This man had worked with military dogs before. Rex could sense it in the way he positioned himself, never making sudden movements, never attempting to grab or restrain him. The injured dog's instincts warred with his training as he evaluated this potential rescuer. Blood continued to seep from Rex's wounds, staining the sand beneath him a dark crimson. His vision flickered in and out of focus, and he knew that without medical attention soon, he wouldn't survive the night. The desert temperature would drop dramatically once the sun set, and his weakened body wouldn't be able to maintain its core temperature. The man in camouflage spoke softly, but Rex couldn't make out the words. His hearing was becoming muffled as shock began to set in. The stranger moved closer, and Rex caught sight of something that made him pause. Hanging from the man's tactical vest was a small patch that Rex had seen before. It was the insignia of a Navy SEAL team, one that had worked alongside Rex's unit during a joint operation 6 months earlier. Rex remembered that mission vividly. His squad had been tasked with clearing a compound suspected of harboring high-value targets. The SEAL team had provided overwatch and backup support, and Rex had worked directly with their point man to detect explosive devices. The memory brought with it a flood of recognition, but this man wasn't someone Rex had worked with before. The SEAL reached into his medical kit and pulled out a field dressing, but Rex still refused to let him approach. Pain shot through the dog's body as he tried to shift position, but his military training overrode his physical needs. He had been conditioned to only accept aid from his handler or other authorized personnel, and despite his dire situation, that programming remained intact. The stranger seemed to understand Rex's dilemma. He sat back on his heels and studied the injured dog with intelligent eyes. Then, he did something that caught Rex completely off guard. The man began to speak in a low, rhythmic cadence that was different from normal conversation. It wasn't quite singing, but it had a musical quality that seemed familiar. As the words continued, Rex began to recognize what he was hearing. It was a cadence, a military marching song that had been adapted for use by K9 units. But this wasn't the standard version that most handlers knew. This was a specialized variant that had been created by Rex's original training unit, known only to a select group of handlers and their support teams. The cadence told the story of a dog named Thunder who had saved his entire squad by detecting an ambush before they walked into it. Rex had heard this story countless times during his initial training, and later during briefings when new handlers joined the unit. But the version this stranger was reciting included details that were never shared outside the K9 community. Rex's ears perked up as the man continued the cadence, reciting verses that described Thunder's background, his training, and even the names of his handlers. These weren't details that would appear in any official report or public record. They were the kind of intimate knowledge that was passed down through the tight-knit community of military dog handlers and their support staff. The stranger's voice never wavered as he recited the final verse of the cadence, the one that described Thunder's retirement and the legacy he left behind for future military working dogs. When he finished, he looked directly at Rex and said something that made the injured dog's heart race with recognition. He spoke the unit's unofficial motto, a phrase that was never written down anywhere but was known to every person who had ever worked with Rex's squad. It was their secret greeting, their way of identifying themselves as part of the family. The phrase was simple but carried enormous weight within their community. Rex's resistance began to crumble as the implications sank in. This stranger knew things that were impossible to know unless he had worked closely with Rex's unit or had been briefed by someone who had. The cadence, the motto, even the way he approached an injured military dog, all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of their operations. The SEAL extended his hand slowly, palm up, in the universal gesture of non-aggression. Rex sniffed cautiously, catching scents that told him more about this man's recent activities. There was the smell of cordite from recent weapons fire, the distinctive odor of military MREs, and underneath it all, the faint but unmistakable scent of other military working dogs. This man had been around K9 units recently, and not just as a casual observer. The scent profile suggested prolonged contact, the kind that came from working closely with military dogs over an extended period. Rex's analytical mind, trained to process complex scent information, began to build a picture of who this stranger might be. The SEAL spoke again, this time using Rex's military designation rather than calling him by his common name. Very few people knew Rex's official classification number, and hearing it spoken correctly by this stranger provided another piece of evidence that he was legitimate. The man's knowledge seemed too detailed and too current to be anything other than genuine. As if sensing Rex's wavering resistance, the stranger began to recite another piece of information that sent shockwaves through the injured dog's consciousness. He spoke the names and service records of Rex's previous handlers, including details about their combat deployments and the specific missions where Rex had served alongside them. But it was the final detail that completely broke down Rex's defenses. The man mentioned Corporal Martinez's nickname for Rex, a silly name that the handler had used only in private moments when they were off duty. It was the kind of intimate detail that could only be known by someone who had served closely with them or had been trusted with their personal stories. Rex's world suddenly shifted as memories flooded back with startling clarity. The private nickname the SEAL had mentioned wasn't just any casual name. Corporal Martinez had called Rex Buddy during their quiet moments together, away from the formality of military protocol. It was a name Martinez used when they were sharing rations after a long mission, or when he was cleaning Rex's wounds after a firefight. The intimacy of that knowledge broke through Rex's final barriers of resistance. The injured dog's tail gave the faintest wag as recognition dawned. This stranger wasn't just someone who had worked with K9 units. He was someone who had been trusted with the personal stories and private moments that handlers shared only with their closest military family. The SEAL's knowledge suggested a connection that went deeper than casual interaction. Understanding that he had finally gained Rex's trust, the man moved slowly toward the wounded animal. His hands were steady as he began examining the shrapnel wounds, his touch gentle but professional. Rex could feel the confidence in the man's movements, the way he assessed injuries with the skill of someone who had performed battlefield medicine countless times before. The SEAL worked quickly but methodically, cleaning Rex's wounds with antiseptic solution and applying pressure bandages to control the bleeding. As he worked, he continued speaking in low, soothing tones, sharing more details about Rex's unit that gradually painted a picture of how he had come to know so much about their operations. The stranger revealed that he had been part of a joint task force that worked closely with K9 units across multiple theaters of operation. His job had been to coordinate between special operations teams and military police units that employed working dogs. In that capacity, he had learned the histories, capabilities, and personal quirks of dozens of military working dogs and their handlers. Rex began to understand that this man was more than just a rescue. He was someone who had made it his business to know about military working dogs, to understand their value not just as tools of war but as individual soldiers with their own personalities and bonds with their human partners. The respect in the SEAL's voice when he spoke about Rex's service record was genuine and deeply felt. As the medical treatment continued, the stranger shared details about the explosion that had claimed Rex's unit. He knew about the mission parameters, the target they had been investigating, and even the tactical decisions that had led to their position when the IED detonated. His information was so current and detailed that Rex realized this rescue wasn't accidental. The SEAL had come looking for Rex specifically. Somehow, word had reached the special operations community about the missing military working dog, and this man had volunteered for what was essentially a solo rescue mission into hostile territory. The risk he was taking became clear to Rex as he processed the implications of the situation. Operating alone in enemy territory to rescue a wounded dog went far beyond normal military protocol. This was a personal mission, driven by the SEAL's understanding of what military working dogs meant to their units and to the broader military community. Rex represented years of training, countless successful missions, and irreplaceable experience that couldn't be easily replaced. But more than that, Rex sensed that this rescue was motivated by something deeper than professional duty. The way the SEAL handled him, spoke to him, and cared for his wounds suggested a personal connection to military working dogs that went beyond mere respect for their service. This man understood the bond between handler and dog because he had experienced it himself. As the bandages were secured and pain medication was administered, Rex felt strength beginning to return to his body. The bleeding had stopped, and the worst of his pain was being managed by the medical intervention. But, perhaps more importantly, he was no longer alone. The presence of another soldier, someone who understood his world and his value, provided psychological comfort that was almost as healing as the medical treatment. The SEAL gathered Rex carefully in his arms, lifting him with the practiced ease of someone who had handled injured soldiers before. Rex's weight was distributed properly to avoid putting pressure on his wounds, and the man's grip was secure without being restrictive. As they moved toward the jeep, Rex caught sight of the second figure who had remained with the vehicle. The driver was another special operations soldier, equally well-equipped and alert to their surroundings. This wasn't a hasty rescue mission thrown together at the last minute. It was a carefully planned operation with proper backup and support. Rex began to understand the full scope of what had been done on his behalf. The jeep was equipped with medical supplies specifically designed for treating military working dogs. There were specialized stretchers, veterinary medications, and even communication equipment that would allow them to coordinate with military veterinarians during the evacuation. Someone had planned this rescue mission with the same attention to detail that would be given to extracting a wounded human soldier. As they drove away from the abandoned village, Rex reflected on what had just occurred. In his darkest moment, when he had been ready to accept that his service was over, help had arrived from an unexpected source. The SEAL community's reputation for leaving no one behind apparently extended to military working dogs as well. The vehicle moved swiftly but carefully across the desert terrain, taking a route that avoided known danger areas while maintaining radio silence. Rex could sense the professionalism and skill of his rescuers as they navigated the complex challenges of moving through hostile territory with a wounded passenger. Every decision they made was calculated to maximize his chances of survival while minimizing risk to the mission. The jeep bounced across the rugged terrain as they made their way toward the extraction point, a secured landing zone where a medical helicopter was waiting. Rex lay on the specially designed stretcher, his breathing steadier now thanks to the 4 fluids and pain medication the SEAL had administered. Through the vehicle's rear window, he could see dust clouds in the distance, suggesting that enemy forces might be tracking their movement. The SEAL who had rescued him checked Rex's vital signs regularly, monitoring his pulse and breathing with the expertise of a combat medic. Between medical checks, he shared more of the story that had led to this rescue mission. Rex learned that the explosion had been detected by drone surveillance, and when the initial rescue team had found only 2 casualties at the blast site, they had immediately begun searching for the missing military working dog. The search had been complicated by the fact that Rex had wandered several kilometers from the original explosion site before collapsing. His blood trail had been obscured by wind and the activities of the Taliban fighters who had investigated the area. It had taken sophisticated tracking techniques and intelligence gathering to determine his approximate location. The SEAL revealed that he had specifically volunteered for the rescue mission when traditional search and rescue protocols had failed to locate Rex. His background in special operations and his experience working with K-9 units made him uniquely qualified for what was essentially a needle-in-a-haystack operation. The mission had been given unofficial approval by his commanding officer, who understood the strategic value of experienced military working dogs. As they approached the extraction point, Rex could hear the distinctive sound of rotor blades cutting through the desert air. The medical helicopter was already on the ground, its crew preparing to receive a wounded patient. Through the vehicle's communication system, Rex could hear radio chatter as the SEAL coordinated with the flight crew about his specific medical needs. The helicopter crew included a military veterinarian who had been specially assigned to this mission. Rex realized that his rescue had involved multiple branches of the military working in coordination. The level of resources being devoted to his recovery spoke to something larger than just the value of one military working dog. The SEAL explained that Rex's service record had made him a high-priority recovery target. Over 4 tours of duty, he had detected more than 40 explosive devices and had been directly responsible for saving hundreds of American and Allied lives. His experience and proven track record made him worth the risks involved in this rescue operation. But, as Rex listened to the man's explanation, he began to understand that there was something more personal driving this mission. The SEAL spoke about military working dogs with a reverence that suggested personal experience. His knowledge wasn't just professional, it was deeply emotional and rooted in shared experiences that had shaped his understanding of the human-animal bond in combat situations. The Jeep came to a stop near the helicopter, and Rex was carefully transferred to the aircraft's medical bay. The veterinarian immediately began a more comprehensive examination, documenting his injuries and adjusting his treatment plan. The shrapnel would require surgical removal, but his vital signs were stable and his prognosis was good. As the helicopter lifted off, the SEAL who had rescued Rex remained by his side. During the flight to the military medical facility, he shared the rest of his story. Years earlier, he had been partnered with a military working dog during a deep reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines. The dog had saved his life by detecting an ambush that would have killed his entire team. That dog had been wounded in the firefight that followed, and despite the SEAL's best efforts, they hadn't been able to save him. The loss had affected the entire special operations community, and it had sparked a commitment to ensure that no military working dog would ever be left behind if there was any chance of rescue. Rex's rescue mission was part of that larger commitment. The SEAL community had made it their unofficial policy to support K-9 units whenever possible, providing backup and specialized capabilities that regular military units couldn't offer. They understood the unique value that military working dogs brought to combat operations, and they were willing to take significant risks to protect that resource. The helicopter touched down at a forward operating base where a full veterinary surgical team was waiting. Rex was wheeled into an operating room that had been specially prepared for his surgery. As the anesthesia began to take effect, he could see the faces of the medical team gathered around him, all focused on ensuring his survival and recovery. The last thing Rex remembered before losing consciousness was the voice of the SEAL who had rescued him. The man was speaking to the surgical team, providing details about Rex's service record and explaining why this particular dog was worth the extraordinary efforts being made on his behalf. His words carried the weight of personal conviction and professional respect. When Rex awoke several hours later, the surgery had been successful. The shrapnel had been removed from his leg, and his other injuries had been treated. A soft cast protected his wounded limb, and furlines provided ongoing medication and nutrition. More importantly, he was surrounded by people who understood his value and were committed to his full recovery. The veterinarian explained that Rex's recovery would take several weeks, but that he should regain full use of his injured leg. His years of service weren't necessarily over, though that decision would ultimately depend on how well he responded to rehabilitation and whether he wanted to continue working in combat environments. The SEAL visited Rex daily during his recovery, bringing updates from the field and news about the ongoing mission that his unit had been conducting when the explosion occurred. The man had become more than just a rescuer. He was now a friend and advocate who ensured that Rex received the best possible care and attention during his rehabilitation. As Rex's strength returned, he began to understand the full scope of what had been done on his behalf. The rescue mission had involved risks and resources that demonstrated just how much the military valued experienced working dogs. But, more than that, it had revealed a network of professionals who were personally committed to ensuring that no military working dog was ever abandoned or forgotten. 3 weeks into his recovery, Rex was walking without assistance and showing clear signs that his physical rehabilitation was progressing ahead of schedule. The veterinary team was amazed by his resilience and determination to return to active duty. But the SEAL who had rescued him, now introduced as Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, had been observing more than just Rex's physical recovery. Thompson had been studying Rex's psychological response to his trauma, watching for signs of what humans might call post-traumatic stress disorder. Military working dogs could experience psychological wounds just as their human counterparts did, and Thompson wanted to ensure that Rex was truly ready to return to the dangers of combat operations. During their daily visits, Thompson had been conducting informal assessments of Rex's reactions to various stimuli. He tested Rex's response to loud noises, sudden movements, and stress situations that might trigger memories of the explosion. To his relief, Rex showed no signs of anxiety or fear responses that would indicate lasting psychological damage. The bond between Thompson and Rex had deepened during the recovery period, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of the realities of combat service. Thompson had shared stories about his own experiences with military working dogs, and Rex had come to understand that this man was someone who truly comprehended the unique challenges faced by K-9 units in modern warfare. As Rex's discharge date approached, Thompson made an unexpected announcement. He had requested permission to have Rex assigned to his Special Operations Unit as a permanent attachment. The request had been approved by both his commanding officer and the K-9 unit leadership, who recognized the value of having an experienced military working dog integrated with elite special operations teams. Rex would be transitioning from traditional military police operations to the more specialized world of Navy SEAL missions. This meant additional training in maritime operations, advanced explosive detection techniques, and specialized insertion and extraction procedures. Thompson would serve as his new handler, a role that would require both men to develop new skills and capabilities. The first phase of their new partnership involved intensive training at the Navy's specialized K-9 facility in California. Rex had to learn to work from boats and helicopters, to detect underwater explosive devices, and to operate in the kind of high-stakes environments that characterize SEAL operations. Thompson, meanwhile, had to complete formal K-9 handler training to supplement his informal experience with military working dogs. Rex discovered that SEAL operations required a different kind of flexibility and adaptability than his previous assignments. Instead of routine patrols and checkpoint duties, he was now training for missions that might involve weeks of preparation followed by minutes of intense action. The work was more demanding but also more varied and intellectually challenging. Thompson proved to be an exceptional handler, bringing a level of tactical sophistication to K-9 operations that Rex had never experienced before. The SEAL's understanding of advanced military tactics allowed him to integrate Rex's capabilities into mission planning in ways that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing risk to both team members. Their first operational deployment together took them back to Afghanistan, but this time Rex was working with a 12-man SEAL team conducting high-value target missions behind enemy lines. His role was to detect explosive devices and early warning systems that might compromise their operations, but he also served as an early warning system for approaching enemy forces. Rex quickly adapted to the rhythm of special operations missions, learning to remain absolutely silent for hours at a time while maintaining peak alertness for any signs of danger. The SEAL team accepted him as a full member of their unit, understanding that his capabilities were essential to their mission success and survival. During one particularly challenging mission, Rex detected a sophisticated bomb-making facility hidden in a cave complex that had been missed by all other intelligence-gathering methods. His discovery led to the capture of a high-value target and the disruption of a major terrorist network. The mission's success was attributed directly to Rex's unique capabilities and Thompson's skill in employing them. The success of their partnership led to Rex and Thompson being assigned to increasingly challenging missions across multiple theaters of operation. They worked in maritime environments, desert conditions, urban settings, and mountainous terrain, adapting their techniques to each new challenge. Rex's experience and Thompson's tactical expertise proved to be a formidable combination. As their partnership matured, Rex began to understand that his rescue had been about more than just saving one military working dog. It had been about preserving institutional knowledge, combat experience, and capabilities that took years to develop. His survival meant that future missions would benefit from his experience, and other military working dogs would benefit from the training programs developed around his capabilities. Thompson often reflected on the chain of events that had brought them together, acknowledging that Rex's rescue had changed both their careers in ways that neither could have anticipated. The trust that had been established during Rex's darkest moment had grown into a professional partnership that was making significant contributions to national security operations. Rex's story became something of a legend within the military working dog community, not just because of the dramatic rescue, but because of what he had accomplished afterward. Young handlers were told about the dog who had been saved by a SEAL's knowledge of secret codes and had gone on to serve with distinction in the most elite military units. The secret code that Thompson had whispered during Rex's rescue had been more than just a way to gain trust. It had been a recognition of shared service, mutual sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that connected all military personnel regardless of species. That moment of recognition had started a partnership that would define both their careers and contribute to the safety and success of countless future operations.